Usually in retail, we have a whole space, a whole servicescape that we work with. So the foyer area is actually that little bit of space that you cross as you walk into the store, and perhaps the first couple of metres as you go into the store. So what's quite interesting with being involved in this project, I think, is that it's certainly challenging me to think about how retailers might think about that foyer space as a sort of an engagement opportunity and a learning opportunity before people set off around the store environments. And by the same token, some of the research that we do in retail stores, in the way that people navigate the kinds of cues that they use as they go around that space, definitely come into play in this kind of space too. So things that might be salient in that space, things that might contrast with things that you might expect to be there, things that present psychological barriers, all these kinds of things are things that you're kind of working with here. The idea is working with a stairwell, which is the entrance area into the Petrie Museum. It's quite a narrow space. There's not a lot of scope for a lot of creativity in that space. You're basically working with the stairwell, the walls, the natural and the lighting and the constraints of that kind of space. And what the team have come up with is some quite novel ideas of trying to connect that space to the content of the museum through using some of the imagery that's associated with Petrie himself and some of the artefacts that are on display in that museum, and doing that not just through using visual cues but using audio cues as well. What I have learned is that I wasn't aware of myself going into museums and being in a transitional state as I go through that foyer space, or the sheer scale of some of these foyer spaces that we're dealing with here. And it's quite a journey from sort of going out of the, coming from outside into that building, then navigating across whatever that threshold space is, and then at the end of it be equipped and prepared for the artefacts that I might see in a museum. That kind of thinking can be easily translated for any kind of space, I think, but it's the particular kinds of research questions that come out of it that I'm particularly interested in here. The way these disciplines have come together is absolutely fascinating. I think we all have a synergy in terms of the way that we think about flow and user engagement, but that's probably the extent of it, because I think the language and the way people analyse and evaluate those spaces is very different, and that's been particularly interesting and useful. I mean, we work with virtual spaces too. Obviously we're in an educational environment, and clearly we come at this with some hard business questions when we work with retailers, but to bring these into play in an area such as museums and galleries is quite novel, I think. Certainly in terms of the ideas that the Petrie team have come up with, I think there's some real benefits to be had from making some of the adaptations that we've discussed. I think one of the challenges will be is to carry on the momentum from that stairwell through that foyer space and into the museum, because I think the problem you've got is the foyer space itself becomes a break in the flow, if you like. So you're telling one story, then there's a break, and then there's another story as you go into the museum. So the challenge is how do they take it forwards, and I think that's a really exciting opportunity for them.